Yes, I mean, I will be talking about teaching grammar through Lexis, but in a way, the bigger question really is this idea of teaching grammar better. And, you know, we've heard several talks with different approaches. And I think, you know, fundamentally what we need to understand in choosing our method, and I liked Maria's last comment there, which is, you know, if you don't like the method, find somebody who will teach you that method. There are more than one way of doing things. And in a way, what we need to understand is first, what is our understanding of, in order to teach better, you know, we need to kind of first think about what do we mean by grammar and what are our beliefs of teaching and learning are. And depending on what we think and depending on our ways of teaching and learning, that will have an impact on what we do in the classroom. Okay, now we saw a bit of this about beliefs on teaching and learning on the session where they were talking about brain-friendly approaches, and I'd like you to think about that. I think it was Georgius who mentioned this. You know, talked about these approaches which are suitable for the brain, and keep those in mind a little bit, because we will be kind of referring to those in a way. Now, I've been learning Russian, so if we think about what grammar is, this could be one of them. It's kind of like you know, a list of explanations with some examples. You know, they are I, but would I ever say I admire the big apple? I'm not sure. Sometimes it's backed up with kind of illustrations, which are supposed to help us understand the underlying meaning. It's essentially further explanation. Now, I'm sure if you were faced with this, what I've just shown you, and you'd be a bit intimidated. And we might like to think that we are in some ways different. So, you know, if you think about English books and courses, in a way, we're following a similar approach. It's very much a building blocks approach, where we're thinking about mastery and accuracy of individual parts before we move on to the next step. So as a result, if you're thinking about, you know, when these words first appear in a course, you wouldn't see the word went until the end of a beginner book. And then, or if you start with elementary, you wouldn't see it until the middle of the elementary book. Present continuous, you might get at the end, you know, again, maybe towards the end of a beginner book. Okay, maybe a little bit before went in the elementary book. Be going to maybe later in, you know, unit 10 of your elementary. Present perfect, been, probably not till the end of your elementary course. That's maybe, you know, 200 hours of teaching before you see the word been. And we can go on, that we won't see the past continuous, or have to perhaps, until pre-intermediate. And I want to emphasize this, that this is not seeing these things. It's not simply that we're not explaining them, we're not seeing them. They're not in the material. And what goes with that is actually the kind of examples which are not so dissimilar to the ones we saw in the Russian example. You know, so we kind of, I'd like you to think just, you know, when would you say these things, who to, why, you know, you're not going to New York. I've only got one back. Dracula didn't live in Brazil. Is she going to be a ballerina? Yes, she is. What are the circumstances that we are going to ask, is there a carpet on your bathroom floor? Or, why would we ask, are we studying Chinese? It's a bit of a strange thing to ask. You notice, just referring back to those, they're all nearly all other people. They're not I either. So what's happening here is basically we're teaching a grammar rule, we're explaining it in a particular content, and in a way we're adding the words to the grammar. This is lexicalized grammar. Okay, and you see this in other languages, again in Russian. Here, you could, any of these words, in a way, it doesn't matter what their meanings are or what context they are. They're just there to practice the grammar of the verb endings. And then similarly, on the other side, we give a list of words which we are supposedly able to apply to any of these forms of grammar that we've been taught. Again, English, we can understand that similar things are happening. These are the 100 most common nouns in English. And what I'd like you to do is just to think of all these ones in yellow and understand that often these will not be taught in a beginner course. And I think a key factor of why that is because grammar is the driver, and some of these words are seen as being too complex for the level, but also too complex for the grammar. So we tend to stick with, for example, lists of nationalities because we can use that with the verb to be. The other thing is some of these just don't fit into a particular lexical set. So this is the idea that the words we add to the grammar are in sets. So a word like way simply doesn't appear in any most beginner books. It doesn't appear in most, certainly generalized British English books, because it doesn't really fit into any topic. Similarly, even words like place. What you'll see are each word place itself doesn't get taught. The same goes with vocabulary and with verbs. And here, in a way, what we could emphasize is we're not teaching, these are the 100 most common verbs in English, but we're not teaching could, may, should, might, etc., because we are seeing these words as grammar, rather than just words which are used with a meaning. And again, just referring to Rachel's talk about when she was mentioning about conditionals, I just looked up in at least one beginner book, their word list, and they don't have the word if. So, how do students start creating their own meanings and getting towards expressing their ideas if they don't have the word if? So, if we take it, it's widespread. It's as Maria said, and as some of your parents will be looking for this. The effect of that is that we're focusing on grammar in class. That's what drives the syllabus, and that's what's seen as most important. And then what we're trying to do then is build these blocks. We separate grammar, not just in terms of the tenses, but in terms of the meanings within that grammar. So different meanings within the present continuous, for example. There are kind of gradations of rules. We use context to present the rule and meaning clearly. So we have this idea that we can explain, okay, it's not quite the explanation that we saw in the Russian, but essentially it's the same thing, that we're creating a context to teach the meaning. And, increasingly over the last few years, that means memorable context and fun practice. So, the way we help with grammar is by playing games about it. Accuracy comes through concept checking, clearer explanation. So if students are getting errors, what we need is a further explanation, more grammar tasks. And actually, you know, most of in a lot of books, what we're trying to do is avoid error by restricting the amount of grammar that the students might possibly need or want to use. And then the last thing, as we've seen, is this word separation to grammar, which is graded for the level that it is. And again, it's based on explaining meanings and maybe translating, which I don't personally have a problem with. Okay, what I want to do is just take you through why I feel that's not helpful. Okay, I think there's a different way we could look at it. So the first way is to think about, what does grammar actually mean? So if we take this, have been in, what is the meanings that this student is trying to convey? I guess some of you might think duration, but duration of what? What does that help a listener with? We could add to that for some more grammar words, but again, it doesn't really take us anywhere in terms of being able to communicate something. Now, if we took it, this film ages 1C, we can start at least to think what the student is trying to convey. Okay, we might believe that they don't have ages at this particular level. They might just be able to say film 1C. So they might be in that conversation, in that thing, oh, you know, I want to see that film. And my point is here, even though without any grammar, wrong order, or I've been wanting to see that film for ages, the students are enabled to communicate something from which the listener or the teacher can work with and move things forward. So fundamentally, the thing we must remember is that vocabulary is the driver of the communication, not grammar. And you can see this if you kind of look at these kinds of sentences, present continuous. Now, we could decide that basically there are different meanings of the present continuous in these sentences. You know, there's some which are kind of about the future, some which are around now. What we'll see is maybe we shouldn't be making such a big distinction there. But really what's making these sentences more difficult is not the grammar, it's the vocabulary that goes with it. And just as a kind of, you know, coda to that this is from the Pearson toolkit on the general scale of English. And these are the items of grammar and words associated with each level. Now, I mean, there are slight problems with this, but I think it gives you an idea. It's kind of, it's an interesting thing. And what you kind of see is basically after B1, you've more or less learned all the grammar there is, or that you should have been exposed to it or have some kind of competence in it, even if you're making mistakes, etc. And actually, you know, from B2 onwards, I would say at C2, they've only got 625 words because it's just too much to even kind of contemplate how many other words we could add there. What you see is this exponential growth of vocabulary. So, you know, at the higher level, basically, you know, we might consider just abandoning all kind of grammar teaching. And actually at the lowest levels, perhaps we need more. There's another reason why it doesn't kind of quite work. This is a kind of joke in a way. This is from the book, Everything is Illuminated. This is how it starts. So I'm going to read it out to you. So my legal name is Alexander Perchel, but all of my friends dub me Alex, because that is a more flaccid to utter version of my legal name. Mother dubs me, Alex, stop spleening me, because I'm always spleening her. It is because I'm always elsewhere with friends and disseminating currency and performing so many things that spleen a mother. Father used to dub me Shapka for the fur hat I would don even in summer. He ceased dubbing me that because I ordered him to cease dubbing me that. It sounded boyish to me, and I've always thought of myself as very potent and generative. Now, what you kind of see is, I mean, that in a way is our attitude to grammar. We think of grammar being potent and generative. But in a way, what that shows is ultimately what kind of can happen when we just give the grammar rule and we think of words and just adding them together. Language doesn't really work like that. Now, from the grammar view that we saw before, the way to solve those problems are better explanations of words, better explanations of grammar, although even though the grammar actually in that section is more or less correct. So that's one reason why it won't work. Why won't it work? Well, partly it's because the meanings of grammar, though we kid ourselves about this, are fuzzy. They're not clear. So just even at the simplest level, think of this, what are you doing? Are we talking about now or the future? Most people would go for now, especially if I add now. But then if you add, we talk about this, what are you doing? Nothing, we can assume it's about now. But what are you doing now? Nothing much. Do you want to go for a coffee? In a way, we're shifting slightly towards a kind of future meaning. And then, you could go, what are you doing here? I'm going to the bank. We could say this is in the process right now. But interestingly, if you suddenly shift it to what are you doing here? I'm going to see the bank manager. We sometimes consider this going to see as a kind of future meaning, though the going is perhaps in the present. And, similarly, we could say I'm going to the library to do some work. Is this now or the future? Compared to I'm going to do some work. Essentially, this is the same, we could exclude library. Does it make a difference? And then, we make going to as something of the future, but we don't think of is coming to stay as a separate form. My question is going to just the present continuous here, really? And then if we are treating it as a separate thing, why are we, perhaps we could just think of going as a meaning of the verb that's making the difference. And we could compare that to we're planning, I'm hoping to, I'm thinking of. In a way, these are no different to I'm going to. And by separating out these patterns, we're kind of not allowing the students to see patterns in certain ways. So there's an ambiguity, basically, in the grammar rules that we give, whether we like it or not, and we can't really avoid it. And similarly, obviously, that's true of words. So if we think of pull, if you look at these examples, in each case, pull is slightly different, even though you may actually use the same word, perhaps in your own language, perhaps not. So it's possible that in some languages, pulling a shirt is different to pulling a big trailer, or pulling it out of your bag is different to obviously the idiom pulled it out of the bag. So in a way, collocations, what we're talking about here, the collocations kind of affect each other. They kind of, they're not separable in a way in terms of meaning. So we can't just teach pull and shirt and pull and without looking and out. We can't teach all these words separately and expect the students to produce them. You won't get accuracy in that way. And there's a further reason for that, in the sense, most of you will be familiar with this context where kids, when they start by saying went and go'd correctly, and then they often go through this period where they start exaggerating the rules, as was mentioned earlier. We are pattern-making machines. But what's important to understand is we're also conformists. And we don't stick with goad, we continue with went, because that's what everybody else says. And so usage always wins out over a strict rule. Or at least the patterns that we encounter are maybe word-based. So round went rather than necessarily all the time go. And you can see this this was Pauline Sider's examples from the 1980s, their text. They give these examples of it's 5:40, it's 6 less than 20, it's 2/3 past 40 past 5, it exceeds 5 by 40. All of these are grammatically correct, but obviously we only say it's 5:40. All of these other ones are possible in other languages, perhaps. Why not in English? Because we just don't say it in that way. So again, the grammar that we might teach is not, it's not wholly generative. We don't take all the options which are available to us as native speakers. So in terms of accuracy, you won't get accuracy just by teaching a rule and the words. So how do you get that knowledge and accuracy? Well, some of it could come from repetition and study, for example, through learning collocations. We'll see some of these examples in a moment. I think very much it comes from exposure over time. So lots of reading, lots of listening. It's not just about what we study. And I think it comes through kind of trying it out, reusing it, failing and both failed and successful attempts at reuse over time. Again, maybe there's a part which the teacher has to play. But I think also we need to understand that perhaps the answer to this question is probably never. So we assume that the students are all aiming for a C2 perfect. In fact, for many, many students, that's not a realistic goal. And why should it be? And even for those who aim at that, they may never get it because, perhaps talent, I think, comes into it, but perhaps they simply just don't have enough exposure over time. So this makes a different route and consequences for teaching grammar better. My way of thinking about it is if we're looking at grammar comes through use over time, then we need to start from communication in a way like Maria was talking about in the previous section. Actually, the route to teaching grammar better for me would be teach more vocabulary as the first point. So if you have a choice between teaching grammar and vocabulary, I think it shouldn't be divided in that way. But if it is, the vocabulary is more important. That's what drives the communication, not the grammar. More to the point, what we need to be doing is teaching more vocabulary with grammar. So that the words, how they're used, is the students are getting this exposure because we're showing them constantly, how these words work with other words and with the grammar they typically go with. I would like to see more teaching of grammar as vocabulary. So those, for example, those modal verbs to begin with. And, actually teaching a lot more grammar and grammar words at lower levels. But with a view of teaching it through communication, we'll see. Certainly we could practice form and, repetition, as I say, could help, but we need to be doing it through likely sentences and exchanges. So, I admire the Big Apple is not a good example of the grammar that we want to be teaching. I admire him a lot would be a better example of admire. Big Apple, I'm not sure even if I would teach Big Apple. I'll be looking at a different use. I don't like apples, probably would be the most likely. We need to remember that these meanings are fuzzy and limited by usage. So we can't, you know, the solution to a student not understanding the grammar or struggling with the grammar is probably not further explanation, actually, but showing them more examples or encouraging them to relax and not worry. What's called tolerance of ambiguity, which is an important part of a language learner's approach, good language learning. We have to understand that grammar is not a building block. The learning is not linear. So as soon as you start, you learn one thing, then you learn a new thing, and that confuses what you learned before. You start making mistakes like the go and goad, for example. Accuracy, therefore, taking a lot of time, it requires lots of exposure, and it may not be an appropriate goal. In a way, kind of this idea that accuracy takes over a long time is a way of relaxing everybody, both students and teachers, of, you know, kind of freeing them a little bit, I think. And we have to also understand that the accuracy doesn't come through in terms of production, in terms of exams, in terms of speaking. It comes through communication, through fluency activities, rather than doing lots of very narrow gap fills, basically. So how might that just reflect? So I'm just going to just check my timing a moment. Just going to stop sharing a second. Okay, great. So how might these kind of beliefs about vocabulary and grammar and learning help? And what kind of effect might it have? Well, the first is in our choice of words. So if we take, starting with communication, I mean, this is at a higher level. This is kind of upper intermediate. And our typical way of thinking about teaching the vocabulary is to teach in sets go with the grammar that we're teaching. Okay, so we tend to have this list of words, this kind of, so this is this lexicalized grammar. If we start by the communication, this is about crimes. Typically, the way we would think about is robbery, theft, thieves. You know, you will be familiar with these kind of, you know, murder, these kinds of patterns of kidnapper, kidnapping, these kinds of kind of grammar lists of words and the crimes themselves. The thing is, if you actually think about how you would talk about any of those particular crimes, we might kind of start by saying, oh, did you hear about that murder? Did I tell you I got robbed in Barcelona? Did you know, whatever. So yes, we might need that initial lexical set to some degree. But the language then to know what happened. As soon as we get into the what happened, there's lots of language there which we're not teaching because they don't necessarily fit with our conventional lexical set. So if we take the kind of robbery one, the number 7 here, you know, I was standing outside the cathedral. This guy came up to me, grabbed my bag and ran off. In a way, any kind of street robbery is quite often going to have those kind of combinations. But, you know, if we start from the idea of the topic or the lexical set, those verbs are not going to be taught. We have to think about the communication first. What is it that we would actually say? And the second part of that in terms of grammar, this one is talking about identity theft. Again, I mean, I probably wouldn't even use the word identity theft. You know, I just would talk about what happened. I got a phone call, bank had saying I'd gone £1,000 overdrawn. Someone must have got hold of my details, somehow used my card. Now, we could just draw attention to here, as we're going through the answers, perhaps even, You know, why had here? Why had gone, not I went? And we could just draw attention, see if the students, so this relates to what Rachel was talking about, you know, see if the students understand on it. Okay, and that would be it. We wouldn't have any further practice. There may be practice at other times where we'd have a more focus, a little bit of extra time, maybe some extra examples of present, past, perfect. Or we could look at must have got hold of. And you could kind of just say, why must have got, not must get hold of. So we can give them those options and just kind of see what they know, draw attention. And I might do that even if I haven't taught must have yet. So just drawing attention to some of these patterns, the students may ask themselves, I mean, that's an alternative. You could ask them, is there any bit of the grammar you'd like to after they've gone through all the answers? You could do it in that way, just a kind of noticing moment. Second thing is to think about these words and teaching words with grammar. So, you know, at the lowest level, this is my Russian. I learned the malaka. It means milk. But if you're giving examples, what you can give is chai is malakam. This is tea with milk. And what we learn is, and this is stated, I learned this in the first lesson I had in Russian, cafe is malakam. And what I learned was that with sa, you often have these endings. Now, this is an impartial understanding of the rule, but I understood that and I noticed it as we went forward. And then I'm just at the moment understanding, you know, the wider rule. It's basically that instrumental case that we saw right at the beginning. And this happens within lots of other examples there. If we're thinking about English, just think about the word think. You know, typically we just teach think. We give them the word and we expect the grammar to do all the rest. But perhaps we should be just drawing attention and giving opportunities for students to notice, practice the ways they use these things. I'm not suggesting all of these in one go, but my point is that, you know, really we should be learning quite early on that we can add I think to, I mean, you could do that almost in the first lesson, second lesson, certainly whenever you learn the word think, just showing them how we can add it to any beginning of a sentence. We could describe it as, obviously we know it's a clause. You know, teaching I think so as a chunk to reply, or I don't think so. Noticing again, in some languages, it would be I think not so. Okay, would be the equivalent grammar. So we can't take for granted that the students can just turn. I mean, I think not so would grammatically, you know, potentially would be correct in English. I think not is possible, but we don't say it. So the only way the students are going to develop that is by seeing it and being exposed to it and noticing it. You know, if you wanted to expand, again, this Russian, it's kind of working. We might want to practice, you know, individually and work with the grammar, but what we want to do is be focused on, you know, the most common used forms. So this one, this means with a friend, with some friends, with a girlfriend, with some girlfriends. Okay, so these are the kinds of things. Obviously, that's a chunk that we would typically want to use. And for some students, this is where the studying can help. The studying can help them use that language for friends. They could use these and learn these patterns and be able to use them correctly and accurately. Probably they will continue to make mistakes in terms of using the grammar form with other words. This is what develops over time. Okay, And that's why I mean that at the highest levels, probably you don't really need to be doing any further practice. The students have got the idea. I have got the idea of what happens. It's just that I'm going to be constant because I'm, you're thinking at the time, you make mistakes as you're in the process of talking, and perhaps you don't use this with all the other types. The second example are of subjunctives in the present. In the Spanish, this means don't worry, don't go, don't say anything. Okay, so this is the kind of, we want to be teaching these phrases first. So in English, here's an example from our beginner book that we teach, I'll meet you as a chunk. So what we're doing is really teaching initially, you could say we're teaching it as vocabulary. And what we're showing them is a pattern. So the point which was made that we're pattern generating people, that is true, but we could be generating patterns based on chunks or words, not just on the traditional grammar rules that we consider in the course book. So this is perfectly, what we see is we can add a time phrase or a place, and there's a simple little practice. They're getting kind of repetitions. And then they put it in a little context, related to another situation that we've taught them. Can we meet? Can we? We could learn as well. Similarly, again, this is from Russian. This is a class that I did, starting from communication. So this is a technique using dialogue building. You could do this even easier in English with have you been to. This is what this phrase means. Have you been to? In fact, this middle bit is not really necessary. So I learned, I needed to use bila because bila is applied to women, but I learned this as a phrase, ti bila. And then I asked, the teacher gave me some examples, Hispanic, and then I tried to answer other ones. And through that, we revealed something about, this is a little bit of grammar. There's a particular case again related to the. And then I replied, ti, niet, we've done this, we asked когда. So again, this is a little bit of grammar, but I could learn some basic ones which I needed at this point. And then we went to how was it? Ikak, which is basically a conversation that I'd already had with how are you and the replies. So we're kind of recycling some of the things we had. I'm learning the grammar. I'm learning aspects of grammar, but and interesting, I did this in Russian, in a different Russian class, but we had to learn everything about the. We had to learn different forms of the and na, because sometimes that's confusion. They both use the same case. I had to learn all forms of was, you, we, it was he, she, we, and a neuter form. All of these different forms, even though I don't need them. And only then can you produce that phrase. And that's the way that a lot of our English classes work as well. We could simply, have you been to Athens? They can even use their own language for the place names, Thessaloniki, whatever it is. And the answers are very simple, yes, no. We could ask when, and then, maybe some of this is new language for them, but often it won't be. Last year, 2 years ago, etc. How was it? We can see how we're kind of building the grammar through the thing. Here's an example of how you can, another example at beginner. In this case, what we're seeing here is understanding the fuzziness that I mentioned earlier, in that what we're doing is focusing on the pattern of I'm going, or we're going. It's reduced. So this is this breaking up and chunking that Georgia and Rachel talked about earlier. So we don't have to learn we, they, etc. And we show them that you can find a pattern of where or what. So these are what we're doing. And then this is the when. And the students can rearrange this here. So again, it's got a limited pattern, but it's focused on kind of a quite small area. We can then ask them to create their own sentences. The weaker students will just copy something very similar. Notice all of these are I and we. So again, it's that personal thing driven by personal desires, which again was mentioned in that talk earlier. And, you know, the students may come up with new things, some of which may be, you know, potentially wrong, but we can help them follow that pattern. We then build it again, showing them some limited questions they could ask. Now, here, once you're showing this kind of pattern, you might get students who would go, you know, will see the pattern. They know some grammar already, like grammar words, some other question words. They might ask things like, who are you going? Now, personally, I would say that is a successful use of the pattern, even though it's not strictly correct. And I would probably just leave it at this point for them to follow it through. So again, it's not kind of heightening this kind of concern, because I know that the accuracy of that will develop over time. With all of these things, you know, the students won't be perfect after they've done these classes. They will still be beginner students making lots of mistakes. And if we kind of see this, again, this comes back to this spaced practice. This is why this has an impact, is what we're trying to do is obviously here, we've only taught I and we. Later in the course, we have other situations where they learn he and she and it, etc. But they're very much driven by the conversation. They come up later. So what happens in the traditional syllabus is you get this kind of massed practice. So if you imagine these are the grammar forms, we have all present tenses in the first 4 units. We might get an example of I don't know. So you might get one example of you know, another tense perhaps, but essentially you don't usually. It's not seen before it's taught. And so you have this kind of massed practice. When what we call about a spiral syllabus, what we will do is, for example, this is, you know, we introduce, for example, this is the present continuous here, this form, this or be going that we saw earlier, this being form. So kind of breaking out of that be going to, etc. You get it once, you get it twice, 3 times, 4 times. What you're seeing is repetition and focus, again, which was mentioned, spaced out over the course of the course. And that has an impact because of the actual examples that you get. So it's from a different book, in fact, this one. Again, another beginner book of being. These are the examples. So there's actually only 35 examples that they get in the book of being. Most of them are they, you know, she, noun, we, you know. So actually the number of I and you, again, that personal thing is reduced because we're focused on teaching grammar and giving kind of restricting what might happen with it. Whereas with beginner, because we've introduced it earlier, you can start including it in other grammar exercises, in other listenings, in your own conversation, obviously. You could ask the students every class, what are you doing now? At the end of the class, perhaps. And so they have the opportunity to get many more examples. And these are spread out, they're spaced over time, which, as we heard earlier, is, you know, good for the brain. So as a result, you know, that comes from a different view of grammar and a different view of learning and teaching. The same could be true. We could start with other chunks at higher levels. So I've taught, how long have you been doing that as an initial chunk? You know, I'm a teacher. How long have you been doing that? Oh, I've got my yoga class later. Ah, how long have you been doing that? So that we can teach them the phrase first and show them how that might be used, and then make use of that to expand the chunk, if you like, and then maybe later considering the underlying grammar and meaning. Okay, sorry, I'm just conscious of the time here. All right, yes, just almost there, almost there. So just this last couple of things. So here, again, is thinking about this accuracy coming through fluency and what we might call repeated affordances. So if we're starting with a communication, this is from exercise. These are tasks from intermediate outcomes. And basically the ones in red are from the unit where we teach narrative tenses. But actually all of these ones, I've added this is someone I usually add, which got cut from the book for various reasons, are also opportunities for practice. Practice and teaching of narrative tenses. So, you know, the grammar mindset that we saw at the beginning would say, this is the moment these red ones are the moment they're learning. If they get problems here, then what we need to do is now do more exercises on this. Whereas I would say, if they're making mistakes here, I would say, that's understandable. It's going to happen. Doesn't matter, because I know they're going to get lots of opportunities to further put these ideas into practice. And it's most of the time, it's not really to do with not understanding the underlying meaning. It's not to do with the explanation. It's to do with the fact that, you know, how words and grammar interact and doing it in the moment of talking. So, you know, what would happen in class, as an example of this, you would have a task like this. This is from, again, intermediate. They have they have to talk about what's happened in the picture. It generates lots of talk. What I would do is maybe think about what was going to be said before. Some of these things might be what the students tried to say. I try and respond to that by showing them the full amount of what they were trying to say. And then I would draw attention to aspects of grammar within this. So I might gap this word looks and go, well, you know, we could just go like as simple as this, you know, what word can go here? Okay, students say, he is a bit fed up. Yeah, it could be. And if you're not sure, okay, and then we elicit the idea of look, and then we might then, you know, also gap this one and kind of say, what's missing here? And, you know, some students may know. If they do, you'd fill it in. We might ask why it is, and we have a little discussion about it. Even though this is not necessarily, you know, the units where we're learning look like. And, you know, you can see, referring to Maria's thing, that this is how we might deal with the grammar of exams, you know, as we're going through. So just to summarize, what I would say is, you know, in this sense, teaching grammar better depends what you mean by grammar. It will depend on your view of grammar. It will depend on your view of learning. In all cases, better in the class is a drop in the ocean of learning. Most learning happens outside the class. So, you know, just kind of think about that. If you're thinking about changing your attitude or people arguing for a different method, you know, think about the cost. You know, is it going to bring added benefit to you as the teacher in terms of time? And understand that any kind of change will be marginal. You know, there are no magic bullets. And so while I'm presenting something here, which I think it works well, and I kind of feel that the students engage with and relates to how people learn, it's not magical. It still takes hours and hours and years to learn a language. And so really what we need to be focused on as well is being good enough for ourselves in the classroom, true to our beliefs, and basically enjoying our job. And that is it. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions. If I could just do a little bit of a plug. Firstly, this is a book, an ebook we've got out, which kind of touches on why the kind of grammar rules that we teach don't always work, as we think our approach to many of those grammars aspects. The thing on present continuous is mentioned there. And then we're also running online courses now on planning from course books and teaching lower levels, which is an area I've become really interested in, which you can do either as self-study or we run Zoom versions from time to time.